This is the Open Global Mind Community Call for Thursday, August 14th, 2025. Um, we are gathered here in part to talk about what our news sources are, or who we trust, or how the world is melting, or any one of those directions that you would like to take this in. It cuts across things like how, what norms should we use to share information with one another on our list and other places. It also goes to how do you not spin into conspiracy theories, but find interesting and trustworthy information? It goes to the death of journalism, or the ongoing, protracted, agonizing death of journalism, which would make a great movie or animation at some point, and what replaces it, if anything, because people always need information. Even in terrible situations, people always get information. Small side note, uh, trust is this lovely, deep, complicated issue. And one of the things I point out is that in the former East Germany, in the DDR, on the surface, it was an extremely low trust environment because 1 in 10 citizens were basically informants to the Stasi, the state police. And there was this huge observation apparatus. There's a really good, The Lives of Others is a really good movie dramatizing sort of the spies, the total surveillance state. And I'm actually wearing Who Will Watch the Watchers t-shirt. So a total surveillance state going on in East Germany. But underground, the way you got healthcare, education, Western goods, whatever else, was an incredibly high trust network because people had their lives were on the line. And the more the pressure is socially, the more the private networks are deep and important. And in those settings, when those nations come into some new form, those people will probably never experience a trust as deep as the one they had with their underground connections and the people that they were like really making a life with because so much was on the line. And I like this about trust. I think trust is weird in that it's fragile, but it's really solid. It happens in quirky places, and sometimes in the places that look the least trustworthy is where some of the deepest trust is being brewed. And that was a kind of a long digression off of how do we know what information to trust? How do we know uh, the things that are floating past us in the information torrent, which we are mostly drowning in? How do we know which ones are worth remembering and forwarding? How do we sort of put our reputations behind them when we send them into some community space where the information is normally shared? Because that's what we're doing. We're basically saying, hey, I think this is interesting for you all. That is the gesture of forwarding something into a group. And it matters a lot because it's in trusted communities that we're going to get, hopefully, some of the most reliable info. But I don't know. Our trusted communities open to being spun hard and losing their track. Judy, a whole new environment for you. I love this. Your move is done. You're muted, but I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled to know that your move is over.
Sorry, I just unmuted. Yes, I'm done.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It was interesting.
Interesting is a good word. All right. So it's a nice placeholder when things are interesting. Thanks. Well, I'm just sort of introing the topic, and I'm about to head to Gil and Kevin and Mike, who've raised their hands. So let's go, Gil.
Yeah, interesting is an interesting word.
Isn't it interesting?
It says so much and so little at the same time.
God, yeah.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah. So I'm trying to weed it out of my conversations with only partial success. Love the opening provocation, Jerry. You touched on a bunch of themes that were all really the same theme.
Yeah.
And it's really fascinating. And the notion of the East Germany example of no trust and deep trust living together and somehow maybe interacting is really fascinating and rich provocation. I've never heard it put quite that way before. Excuse me. I've been very aware of this question of what do we trust? How do we trust? What are trusted sources? In lately following multiple sources for the news out of Gaza, Israel, Palestine, that particular mess. And I'm finding really contradictory, credible sources about matters of what's going on, and realizing that we have no idea what's so. I mean, if you're not there, even if you're there, it's hard because you're there with a limited view of what's going on. But to I'm scanning multiple sources from multiple different perspectives, politically, alliances, and so forth, and I can't figure out what's so. I think of myself as usually pretty discerning and able to sift through different kinds of information and figure stuff out, and I'm stumped, and I'm finding that fascinating and weird.
What's the degree of the lockdown, information lockdown in Gaza? Is there no, like, I monitor the Ukraine war in part by watching some Telegram channels
Yeah.
because Telegram is outside of most of the news channels. I know it's owned by Vkontakte, which is a Russian company, but still Telegram seems to be pretty
Yeah.
reliable for these kinds of
It,
communications. Is there something like that happening in Gaza where there's an network?
it's really tricky as far as I can tell. I mean, Israel officially is not letting foreign journalists in.
Right. We know that there's a journalist in a blockade.
Yeah, and even worse, the news feeds into the Israeli public are very limited. So the Israeli population apparently doesn't have a deep sense of what's going on. Although I'm hearing from people I know there who do.
Mhm.
And there's another rising wave of anti-war and the war sentiment in Israel. Obviously, deep disdain for Netanyahu, who's got kind of a lock on things. I just got a post, just got a message this morning from a colleague of mine there who's agitating for general strike. So we'll see what happens with that. But overall, the Israeli public doesn't seem to have a view of what's going on. There are some independent journalists in and out of Gaza. There's some outlier anti-Hamas Palestinian voices starting to be heard, but it's really hard to know.
Thanks, Gil.
Yeah.
Kevin, are you still? You're in the queue, but I think you stepped away from your camera. Why don't we go to Mike and come back to Kevin when he is back on?
Thanks a lot. Thanks for a great topic and a good framing. Uh, I have several things to throw out, and if we pick up one of these themes, great. If not, um, but first, I have a plea for the group. Tomorrow, I leave for Taipei. I'm speaking at the World Innovation, Technology, and Services Alliance, which is about 80 national IT associations. But I know a lot of you have done things with people in Taiwan. I don't have a lot of time, but I'm particularly interested in names of people that I should look out for at this conference. I mean, there's always, 2,000 people, and if I can identify people you say are interesting and different,
Name
I
name of the conference again, Mike?
WITSA, WITSA. I will put it on the in the chat. And then, more importantly, I'm going to Manila for the first time, and my schedule's almost open. Unfortunately, I'm there on a Saturday and on a pseudo holiday, so I only have one day to meet corporate and government people. But again, if there's interesting people I could connect to and reach out to and say, hey, Jerry told me you're fun. You know? So anyway, that's that ties a little bit into the theme. I'm
Cool.
looking for people I can trust to tell me what's really going on in both countries.
This is how it works.
This is exactly how it works. We all call up Jerry, and Jerry tells us to look at his brain, and from
We
there
know the network.
yep. And if we don't talk to Jerry, if we all trust Jerry, but we also trust Snopes because that's the other place. So two case studies first. Some of you may have seen the news story that Elon Musk had offered a $500 million sponsorship deal for the Baltimore Ravens football team. How
I
many
had
people
not.
saw this?
Yep.
And
Nope.
the Ravens said, fuck you. No way. We're not going to deal with a billionaire conspiracy. We're totally made up,
Wow.
but all over the place because it seemed too plausible. Snopes hasn't written it up yet, but another fact-finding group said, no, this is not true. There have been some other teams that had other offers from Musk and rejected them, but somehow Baltimore, the gritty people of Baltimore seemed like the better um, team to focus on. So that's
Wow.
one. Just this is the last 24 hours. But the other case study I would love to get us to focus on a little bit are internet quotations.
Hmm.
You all know I love a good bumper sticker, 7, 8, 12 words. And when I hear a great one, I just have to share it. And half the time I share it before I really do my research because it's attributed to somebody really good, or it's, Voltaire or George Bernard Shaw or Mark Twain, three of my literary heroes. And I just, automatically want to share the words. And almost always within 24 hours, I come back and think, oh, I better check this. And half the time, it's not true. I mean, the quote is true, but it's not attributed to the right person. Um, I found one lately by Marcus Aurelius that was just perfect. Far better to be rejected by society than subsumed by a mob of idiots. Turned out Leo Tolstoy made that up and attributed it to Marcus Aurelius.
Nice.
Just weird. I mean, some of these the quote investigator is very good at sort of tracking
Quote
and finding.
investigator's great.
It is awesome, and I don't know how many people are involved, but it is. But quote investigator is not the answer. I mean, we need something else. What I think we need is it's what is it called? There was 20 years ago, a company in Singapore invented electronic graffiti. So you could use their app, go to any website in the world, and you could write graffiti on the website that would be available to anybody who used the same app. And so you could write, actually, Marcus Aurelius didn't say this, Leo Tolstoy did. Look here. Never got a business model, never worked. So that's a case study that I personally would very much like to have resolved. The other thing that we focus on at Carnegie a lot, and we have a whole effort on the information environment. There's a new book by the leader of that effort called The Information Animal. Really brilliant woman, Alicia Wanless, and she makes the case on how we need a all disciplines, all angles attack on this. Um, she was part of a recent project to identify 11 ways to fight disinformation. Uh, Still the best thing I've seen on the topic. Unfortunately, of the 11, none work really well. Some could work well, but there's no business model to pay for it. But I'll put that in the chat as well. My last thought is that we need to stop saying disinformation, misinformation, because that gets us to focus on the source and somehow filtering out the bad stuff. When the two things we should be focusing on first and foremost are the forwarders, the amplifiers. Sometimes they're malicious trolls funded by Russia. Other times they're just stupid idiots up at 2 o'clock in the morning who are just not awake enough to know that something is manipulating their mind. And then the second, I think the most important thing is brain defense. Don't call it media literacy. Don't call it critical reasoning. I mean, it's brain defense. Is how do you repel hateful, ignorant, deceitful, deceiving memes and bumper stickers? And how do you identify when something is
Uh-oh.
information? Hope you can answer one or two of my 15 questions.
Damn, that was a virtuosic tour. I had not heard of the book. I had not heard of many of those things, and I certainly hadn't heard of the Musk Baltimore Ravens thing, which Google's poorly. It gets a Yahoo hit and something else, but otherwise kind of peters out quickly. Anybody else heard about these things?
No.
Gil had, but you're muted. Find that mute button. There you
Trying
go.
to be well behaved here. I did hear about the Musk Ravens thing, but not about the refutation of it. Lies move fast, truth corrects slowly. I think somebody once said, maybe Abraham Lincoln.
It's
That's who it
a
was.
lot. A lie makes its way around the world 5 times before the truth gets its pants on. Roughly,
Yeah,
I will
yeah.
find the correct quote in a second.
For sure, Abraham Lincoln. When in doubt, Abraham Lincoln said the quote. I didn't.
I also saw on the internet that Abraham Lincoln said, "Never trust anything you read on the internet."
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah, go to him for that. I wasn't aware of quote investigator. I usually when I'm in question on a quote, I will put the quote into the search and have multiple quote sites show up and cross tabulate and make sure, see if it's real, but you never know. Michael, I like what you said about there's no business model for fighting disinformation. There certainly is a business model for spreading it. So there's a fundamental conflict in the economy of now. When you said we shouldn't call it disinformation, that echoed for me because I've long been thinking we should call it lies, and bullshit, which are different, of course.
Well, but both of them imply intent.
Bullshit, not necessarily.
Oh, that's true. That
Yeah.
maybe,
So there's different kinds. There's the intentional and there's the stupid or lazy or callous and so forth. There's all that. But anyhow, too many questions to respond to. I will note that on Living Between Worlds next Wednesday, Ken and I are hosting a guy named Stuart Hill, emeritus professor in social ecology, who's going to talk about why he wants us to lie and lie boldly as an important social change strategy. So tune in next Wednesday if you want to hear more about that.
Nice. Can you give us a link to Stuart, please?
Maybe.
Oh, okay. I'll Google him. Don't worry.
Yeah, I learned this technology lesson on Monday that you really shouldn't pour protein drink onto your laptop.
Oh, shoot.
So I'm working on Pad this week, which is actually not too bad. It's getting better as the Pad central experience, but there's some things I can't do quickly.
There's the whole do tagline for them. Pad, not too bad.
Yeah.
Kevin, thank you for your patience.
Yeah, thank you. Take my hand down. I'm going back to your initial thing of East Germany and the trusted channel and non-trusted channel. I would suggest we try to make the OGM list a trusted channel. And there have been things on the OGM list that have been like, GPT is the best thing since ever. But if you look there, it was on Medium by somebody with a made-up name with no external validation. And you look at everything else that person has written, there is no external validation. So don't send things to this list that you haven't validated, or you can see that source doesn't validate. So create a trusted channel here. And secondly, I'm with Tolstoy. You use the quote for the truth that it has. I mean, I've learned this from indigenous folks. They often say it may not have happened, but if you think about it, you can see that it's true. So listen for the truth, and there's so many things you don't need to know whether it's true or not. I really don't pay much attention to all the things that people are wanting to say is scary, because scariness now is a collective viral thing that comes to you, and you can be infected by other people's scaredness. And I have no time for other people's scaredness, and so it doesn't bother me much. I subscribe to the Atlantic and the New Yorker and the Post and the Times, and actually the Apple News app is really quite good and extensive. I'm surprised at it. And a few other things, the Politico, whatever, when I need to. But you don't need to know all these lies, and you don't need to follow them, and just like listen for the truth and don't get scared. But let's create a trusted channel at OGM and stop sending things that you haven't checked out, that are unvalidated and you haven't gone deep. I wish people would treat the OGM list with more respect. And that's my request. Don't send the crap that is often there.
Several things you've touched that are very worth bringing into the conversation, Kevin. Thank you. The incident you just described is one of the reasons for this call. I'm like, yep, we got to sort of sort this out a little bit better ourselves together. Ken Ken Homer has started a separate list where there's information being shared and all that on Signal, which is the most of the secure messaging systems as far as we can tell, because WhatsApp is owned by Facebook, Telegram is owned by Vkontakte, which is Russian. Oh my God. Never mind Facebook and you know all the other places, but that one is actually probably the most secure one, which is why, of course, our Secretary of Defense was using it to plan military strategies and boast about things early in the new administration. Anyway, I never follow Apple News links because I don't use any Apple software other than the damned operating system. I hate like iMusic, iTunes, Apple News. I don't use any of those. So I don't, whenever I click on an Apple News link, it says, hey, you want to start up Apple News? And I'm like, yeah, no, I don't, not for a moment. So if we could follow a protocol, and maybe one of the things we do in this call is we elaborate a protocol for better, more trustworthy conversations in some sense, and we might even publish that. That would be a good thing. I think we would benefit from doing so. But maybe the protocol is, hey, publish a link, and if there's a paywall, go ahead and do the work of going to archive.is or .ph and offering the alternative circumventing of the paywall link right there as the contributor. Just do a tiny bit of extra work so that, but have both the naked link so that we know where the actual source was, and the archive link so that it's reachable by everybody. And then there are some cases in which we might, Kevin, want to forward a crazy ass theory or something that's not very supported, but we should frame it as such. We should say, hey, I just saw this thing that might go viral, that might be another Baltimore Ravens story. It seems really unsupported, but here it is, so you know about it and can watch out for it or comment on it or whatever else. So I'm not sure we need a ban on unsupported stuff. I think we need a frame around unsupported stuff that says, hey, this looks pretty uncredible, but I like I like the fact that it might actually travel, or it's going to affect us, or watch out for the truck, something like that. And so maybe a thing we can focus on is protocols. Just as we talk, let's just derive out what do we want to do as the OGM list and make those available to whoever. I'm willing to bet that there are other online communities that have already done this, whose protocols we could find and adopt, or something like that. This is low-hanging fruit for anybody who wants to have a reasonable community conversation in these times online. Sorry, you just Gil, you had your hand up and then you took your hand down because it's the iPad. It's the
I
iPad.
saw it was up from Legacy, but I wanted to raise it for just now. One of the things I've been really encouraging people to do on their various social media posts is to always post source. You see a lot of people who are like, just like quoting something from somewhere, but not clarifying which words are theirs and which words are the ones they're quoting from, and also where is the source from. And I'm just not inclined to read anything that isn't sourced by somebody. So I'm sort of echoing Kevin in a variation of what Kevin was saying. And Kevin, I liked what you said. I would encourage us to do that, not just in the OGM community, but everywhere we read and write. Is be forces for good information hygiene. Brain protection. Oh, the other thing on brain protection, Mike Nelson's point earlier on, Finland has this as part of their public school curriculum.
Yes.
A lot of things we could learn from Finland. That's a good one.
Yep.
In the United States, critical thinking is taken out of school curriculums.
Right.
Hey, Stacy and Judy, your turn.
Well, I guess I wanted to throw in the word credible, because it seems to me that credibility is at the heart of this, but there's discernment associated with credibility.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
there's sourcing also. And so I think if we could, in some mechanism, have a credibility factor that we could put on a whatever scale you would want, or however we might want to do it, or at least share why someone thinks it's a credible source so that we can further evaluate on our own. I think that would be useful for the community.
Love that. Thank you, Judy. Mr. Patello.
Yeah, I'd like to throw maybe a different perspective, revise something what Mike was talking about. Several things I reacted to, sort of yes and or yes no sort of response to what you threw out, which is great. And my throw out is, I think trust is overrated. And what Judith just talked about discernment. I mean, I think in terms of ethical discernment, verification, and what was the word I was going to come to? It's just going. I'm flying out of my mind. Truth seeking, because
Truth seeking?
truth seeking. The reason for that is you can trust somebody, but they may be giving you disinformation or misinformation. You trust them, so you think, okay. On the other hand, somebody you don't trust, they may be telling something that you should know about. So then you get into the bias of distrust versus trust. So to me, trust is an outcome, and it's circumstantial. It's a particular setting or a thing. It's not generic. It's not something that you overgeneralize, because that's where you start making mistakes, because you trust something more than what it's actually calling out to be on that particular issue. So I'm just calling out trust as something that's overrated. And if we focus on discernment, verification, truth seeking, then we can. And the other point that I want to respond to, Mike, about your brain defense, I have less issues about different domains of expertise, media literacy, critical thinking, yada yada, which is really about emancipatory learning, which is how do we help people become open-minded, truth-seeking, virtuous free thinkers, which creates a place where you can have much healthier disagreements. And I'll just tell you a brief story about something that happened to me. I've been being active on Indivisible, and a highly sensitive person attacked me and said I was a hostile bully. And so I actually went into and did research on highly sensitive people and hostility responses. And lo and behold, I discovered something. There is something called hostility attribution bias. Have you heard that one before? Which is when sensitive people, you may say something slight, and it triggers their amygdala to go on to the attack. And we've all experienced it. But I thought, oh, that's a new bias for my repertoire of describing biases. So there was a lot more under the hood of that story. But it's interesting going to events where it's a very heterogeneous group of people of educational backgrounds and yada yada, because it gives you a much better feel for what's happening outside the circles of symbolic capitalists. I'm done speaking.
Thanks, Rick. Flo.
Oh my goodness, so much. Just in response to that last bit, I wanted to mention that Marshall Rosenberg would often, the guy who started nonviolent communication, he would often, share his experience that unexpressed emotions are very often interpreted as anger. So this is a reason to share one's emotions, even when one doesn't feel a need to, and the NVC thing, which is supposed to make that, a lot of people get freaked out when you share emotions. So the NVC advice is to immediately, when you share the emotion, I'm feeling blah, 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 because, and then reveal the values or needs, that led to that emotion coming up, positively or negatively. And that way people you're exposing the vulnerability about yourself, where it came from, and they're less likely to be activated by that than just hearing that you're mad or confused or whatever it was. I've been interested in this question of sources for a very, very, very long time, from super explicitly from when I was, in the early blogging days, following the development of RSS and everything. I just recently, last month, started with someone else started, but I joined very early, a national project that has evolved into, for a very broad audience. We're working out now whether it's going to be really everybody or kind of a centrist to left thing, because it's been portrayed different ways, and we've drawn people who are enough interested in include everybody. And I'm like, what about the right Christian nationalists? And they're like, that's not what the Republican Party is about. And I'm not saying they all are, but they are there. Like, are we trying to include them in this process? Anyway, we'll have that drag out conversation. But regardless, this project, we will definitely have an ongoing thing of which sources are we putting in the system and which sources are we not. So we'll be dealing with this question in a very practical way over and over again. If anybody is interested to be in that, even as a thing by itself, that might be helpful to the project. In any case, I'd be interested by itself. If people from this group wanted to start a Signal group just to talk about sources and kind of develop a list together and and individually, whatever we want to do with it, but to develop our sensibilities, and some specific language, and specific questions that we help us, in evaluating sources. And I appreciate all the things people have said about that even the ones we decide are not on our, we pretty much trust what we get, when we see things from there. There's a ton of sources that I think it's really important to share, with the framing. Yeah, this isn't on our list, but I'm sharing it because blah, 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 blah. And an obvious example around that right now would be in Gaza. More journalists have been killed than in any other conflict, in whatever history. The comments, when stuff about this is posted anywhere, are so awful that the journalism subreddit on which has been really good, and there's stuff about press freedom all the time, but the comments got so bad that the moderators have banned all posts about the war. It completely blows my mind. Anyway, so I'm in process with them, but and the last thing is I was working for a little while with Ethan on an idea. We ended up realizing we're not ready to go do it, but we had the idea of developing a news reader with two features we hadn't seen anymore, and I won't mention one, but the second one was kind of an anti-echo chamber feature. So you say, here are my feeds. Now you, the news reader, I turn on this button, show me 5% of my feed, make 5% of my feed things that are very different perspective from all the sources I'm following. So it would have to have access to a lot of feeds, and then it would have to do some algorithmic whatever, and then it would just throw into your mix, like every once in a while you're like, oh my God, here's a thing from a KKK publication. Oh my God, here's a thing from Breitbart, or whatever. Whatever, all kinds of sources that are not the ones I'm subscribed to. Check.
Thank you very much. You just reminded me of a wish list item I had back in the days of Twitter, which was I wanted them to offer a feature that would let you say, hey, show me on my feed all the shit I've forwarded that's wrong. That's just notably wrong. Just put my feed or someone else's feed through the washer.
Yeah.
And let me, because if there's no feedback loop, none of us get better at this. None of us get wiser at this. The information just gets worse. The morass gets deeper and darker and stickier. So we need to bake into the systems and services somehow. And part of our problem is that the platforms which are the largest, most profitable businesses on the planet, there are some private companies that are more profitable, I'm sure, but the platforms that are the dominant players on the planet, that are now the oligarchs who are ruling a lot of things, are dominated by the consumer mass market business model, which means algorithm culture, which means addiction by design. And that is a given in our environment that we haven't had any say in fighting, but is now the reality on the ground, which is half of what's happening here, is that we're being led toward mis and disinformation all the time by the platforms, because it glues people to their screens. And that's it. That's one big piece of the problem. And unless we have feedback loops that help us get smarter, and unless we disable the algorithmic addictive loop, we're kind of hosed here. I don't think this plays out very well. End of rant. On to Mike.
I have spoken almost as much as Jerry, and so I'm going to turn it over to Judith, and then you can come back to me. I would just add one thing, though, and we do need to restore shame. So a feedback loop only works if you're embarrassed when you're caught out. But anyway, Judith, I'd love to hear what you have to say, and then I'll come back in on a couple other things.
Well, I was just going to comment that something I started probably a decade ago because of my dissatisfaction with credibility in the issues was I always search X and then I immediately search anti-X on different platforms. And when you see the arguments on both sides laid out by multiple individuals, because if you search anti-X, you'll get a list of people and you can pick who you want. It helps frame the scope of the disagreement and the credibility. And it helped me to figure out, is this believable or not? I want to understand both sides of the issue and form my own opinion based on what both sides of an issue are saying. And it's a little time consuming, but I still find it useful to do that. And if there were a way to systemize that, that would be helpful. But I just thought I'd toss that out because I think we're responsible in a sense for our own belief of whatever we read. And that's a tool we could use individually to explore the zone.
I love that. And I would add, though, one of the challenges is you might go searching for a buzzword that is used by people on one side of the issue. And to hear the counter arguments, you have to somehow find out what the buzzwords used by the other side are. So if you didn't know that white genocide was how Elon Musk and racists in South Africa refer to legitimate efforts to tax white farmers, you wouldn't find those arguments. Or you might not, but it is almost like two or three different languages,
Yeah.
and if we don't have the jargon, we won't find it. But let me get back to two other things that have to do with the business model, and the reason I have some hope that we'll find a way to make money and do good and spread truth is because a key piece of this puzzle is attribution, attributes, and identity. And I think there are business models that would allow us to associate my identity with certain attributes about me and allow me to use the well-established identity to kind of put my watermark or my fingerprint on something that I post. Um, when I was at the White House in the Clinton years, we set up the White House website and we had this feature that allowed people to send an email to the president. Can you guess what happened to those emails?
Hmm.
They were printed out and put in the big bin of regular mail. We always ask people for their regular postal address.
Wow.
And the reason was we could not have Bill Clinton sending emails to people in response to their comments over a regular email service. It would just lead to too much mischief. People could just alter what they were sent. It would look like a real White House email, but the word not would be deleted or, some new sentence would be added. So everything was done the old-fashioned way. Even letters to Socks the cat had to be sent on. So this is partly about making data and content traceable, having a clear way to establish provenance. But I said something important earlier, and that was we don't just need identity. We needed some kind of management system for attributes that matter. And so I might have 58 different attributes that in one setting or the other, I would want to use and share, often without my true identity and without my address and phone number and email address. I might want to just buy some alcohol online and I just need to send some marker saying I'm over 21 and I live in a state where I can buy alcohol online and have it delivered to me. I mean, that's part of the answer that works in a way that protects as much privacy as I need, and allows me to customize the services I buy.
Mhm.
The other reason this is so useful in terms of truth is and trust is because, as I said earlier, the amplifiers are a big part of the problem. A lot of the crap that we're seeing on the social media platforms are promoted by the trolls. And it's a concerted $100 million effort to make sure things move up in the algorithms, and Elon Musk is helping it. If we know who's actually forwarding this stuff and can track it back to trolls in St. Petersburg, we can eliminate half, 80% of the problem and the manipulation of the algorithms. But you can do that so much faster if you have the equivalent of a real blue check mark that allows me
Do
to
not do not even bring the blue check mark up after Musk took over Twitter. Oh
well,
God.
yeah, as I said, the real blue
Yeah,
check.
I know, but that just pains me. It gives me a pang in the heart when you say that.
Yeah, well, we need a nice analogy, and we
Yeah.
do one. Um, the last thought I put in the chat is I'm going to leave a little early to go hear Francis Fukuyama, and he wrote a book more than 15 years ago just called Trust.
Hmm.
Some of you may have read it. Uh, I find it incredibly useful, a little outdated now, but he examines 6 countries, 3 high trust countries and 3 low trust countries, and shows how the lack of trust in Italy, for instance, leads to certain types of corporate structures. A lot of the biggest companies in Italy are still built around a family firm where people could trust their second cousins and they could actually build fiat and have the key positions controlled by one family. Um, in contrast, Japan, very high trust. You shake a hand, you can trust that that deal will be maintained. But anyway, lots going on, and this is an incredibly rich conversation for me, and I hope uh, if anybody has comments on what Carnegie is doing on disinformation and the information environment, or if you want an introduction to Alicia Wanless, just let me know.
Mike, thank you. I wanted to add one thing. You say a lot of things when you talk, so I have to keep notes. Um, One of the very good arguments for self-sovereign ID or other forms of digital ID that do what Mike just said is, and the scenario is memorable and I love it. You're a young woman getting carded to go into a nightclub or a bar. Your driver's license contains all the information anybody needs to stalk you. You should be able to pass through that doorway with just something that says, yes, I am old enough to go into this space. Yes, I am a citizen and I can vote. Move it around. But the cool aspect of a functional, trustworthy ID system is that it reveals only the information that is needed about you at the moment. And it's reliable and blah, 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 blah. Those things are really complicated to do. And worse, they have no business model. So a lot of the startups that have tried to do really good contact stuff, and Kalia Hamlin, who's often on our calls here, Kalia Young, identity woman, she has been working with a lot of these companies. She's been running the internet identity workshops for, I think 15 or more years now with Doc Searles as an open space workshop, which has been highly fruitful. And yet our culture doesn't have, besides a couple like, Google ID and Apple ID-ish kind of things, or use your LinkedIn profile, we don't really have that. And the threat of national digital IDs under Trump or Xi is not a fun prospect. That doesn't feel really good. I don't know. Your mileage may vary on that one, but I don't feel good about that. So we really desperately need these kinds of things. And off to you in the booth, Rick.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I just want to again throw another perspective. I think looks just like Mike's left already, but that's fine. A different perspective on what he just said, because I see trust as an outcome, and that changes your attributions about issues. So a different framing in a psychopathic system such as our political system currently, then there is low trust. Whereas if it's a system of integrity, you're more likely to have trust in those institutions. So at the moment, there's an assault on all institutions of academia, institutes, policy institutes. They're all under siege because we have a systemic psychopathic system that's devoid of the typical shaming responses that would normally curtail that type of behavior. We're living in a situation where the reverse is the case. It's actually validated and encouraged and incited. And so I just want to put that different perspective out there. I want to return to something with Judith talking about from a different perspective about looking at the different points of view across an issue, which is, I think, incredibly important. And I've encountered this within this indivisible group where they are, you know, the old group dynamics of, forming, norming, storming, performing. This group has a case of arrested development because it's so cohesive and norming that it can't work through disagreements. It can disagree about what it's against. That's easy. But trying to say what they're for is much more difficult. And these are where the progressive movements fall over each other and are ineffective. And I'll give you an example from personal experience. I joined this group called Stand Up for Racial Justice. And in that, I started writing, and I started writing about deranged Trump mass psychosis. This is an explanatory model for a complex social political phenomenon. And I got taken to the cleaners by them. And they were, and even a highly sensitive psychiatrist accused me of being an ableist, another example of hostility attribution bias. And I was just, thinking, where's this coming from? And then they got to a point where they banned all of my references to that construct and they took it out. And I pointed, yes, wow, I know, wow, talk about political, talk about PC, progressive wokeness. And
Right.
I just simply said, look, take everything I put in here out. I don't want any of my stuff in here. I'm saying goodbye. And this is an example of now you have to give credit to the regressive unwoke brigade. They're far more effective than the progressive woke or PC woke brigade. But anyway, I just share those examples of, oh, by the way, one thing, Stacey, you mentioned sensitivity. I noticed that. You have to watch the movie if you haven't seen it yet, called Sensitive. It's a brilliant documentary by the psychologist who described the construct, the psychological character trait of sensitivity. Absolutely brilliant. And she highlights Alanis Morissette as an example of that character trait. If you haven't seen it, you got to watch it because it'll enable you to identify people more quickly and understand how to interact with them a little more sensitively.
Can I just say one
I'm
thing
done.
real quick?
Please.
Yeah, I just want, no, I know it's sensitive. I try to stay away from those people. I wanted to point out that oftentimes that also goes for people who have had some sort of trauma in that history.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. Absolutely. It's not always that she describes it as a distinct character trait that's made worse by trauma. So you have to, it's not always trauma informed. It's a
Right.
particular and if you hear the story of Alanis Morissette growing up and her difficulties adapting to her sensitivity and why she felt alienated from her peers, it's an amazing story.
Yeah, I just want to say I'm a highly sensitive person and I don't react that way. So I wanted to make the distinction that there's different kinds of sensitive and it comes out in different ways.
Yeah, well, I think the point what the psychologist was talking about was she got into it to be able to do exactly what you said. Actually, there's another one on, I forgot, it's an Aspen talk about a woman who described her own psychopathy. And it's an absolutely brilliant book. I forgot the name, I have to look it up. But she describes how she identified herself as a psychopath, became a psychologist, and learned how to deal with a psychopath. Yeah, yeah. It's an amazing book.
Around that too, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Let's take a little pause for a second. This is a really rich conversation. We've got a lot of things swirling. A couple people had to drop off to go attend to their lives. But let's take a pause and then step back in. So I'll bring us back in a second. one thing I really like about moments when we have silence here is I do something sort of like what I used to do in Quaker Meeting in Connecticut when I attended back when, because those are meetings, silent meetings. So the most of the hour goes by in quiet. It's just looking at the people in the room. And it got to where with Wilton monthly meeting, which is the meeting I loved and lived nearby, it got to where I would intentionally arrive a little bit early, and I would sit on a far side opposite the doors. There were sort of two doors to come into the room. There were just long benches that we all sat on. And I would watch people come in, and as I got to know everybody, I would get weepy just watching people come in and take their seats just quietly. And one fellow always came in with his son, who lay down with his head in his lap across the bench, and then 15 minutes into meeting, all the children would file out of meetings, but they were welcome for the first 15 minutes if they wanted to be there. And it was just this rhythm, this really beautiful rhythm that I loved. And now back to our regularly scheduled program, which is already in progress. Anybody who, along the way, as we go down our queue, if anyone wants to synthesize, summarize, or amplify, or ask questions to deepen some of our understandings of the things we've been putting on the table, because so far we're doing a lot of putting interesting items on the table, but I think the occasional crystallization of thought is really useful. So please do, Klaus.
Yeah, so what I'm struggling with is that much of this misinformation, disinformation, outright lies, and so on, has an intentionality behind it, and is really rather quite directed towards very specific outcomes. So we get drawn into conversations and get excited about something that's obviously wrong and so on, but when we respond, and we respond to this like one particular misstatement, that doesn't really deal with what the intention of this misinformation was. So the best example was during the last election when you had Elon Musk deploy his AI to strategically misinform population groups. So you had Latinos and African Americans and Arabs and the most unlikely of groups voting for Trump because he captured them with just one issue that was really important to this particular group. So I mean, I observed some stunning conversations before the election where a Palestinian man was defending voting for Trump because he's good, he's the right person to solve this. So we are really in, my God, this is biblical, right? The fight of principalities. When you really get into it from this perspective, then how do you deal with that now? You have to, I mean, we have to really step back and engage on a completely different level. And I'm not sure we have captured that thought. That we are really the impact of this targeted influence over people's worldview and way of thinking and understanding reality is incredibly powerful. I mean, the reason why we are in the mess we're in right now is because someone succeeded, a group of people succeeded in shifting millions of people into a direction that's really against their interest in all of this. And the sort of inclination is to call them stupid or but that's not really the point. This is incredibly powerful, under the surface. We are all vulnerable to it ourselves. And I come back to it as principle, right? It's the battle of principalities here that's referred to. So it's not a new phenomenon. This is like as old as humanity.
Thanks, Klaus. Gil.
Yeah, thanks, Jerry and everybody. A few things. Jerry, you speak so beautifully about Quaker meeting and your clear love for it. Have you been recently?
I went to, I have not been much there. I went to the a Portland meeting. I don't know how many there are here. I think there may only be one.
Yeah.
It was a bit of a drive. And then before every message or comment, people said, "Hi, I'm Jerry. My pronouns are he, him."
Oh dear.
And I was turned off instantaneously. Like, you can wear a badge, and I'll look at your badge, and I'll honor that. And they had, it's Portland plus Quaker, and they had gone like too far for
Yeah,
me.
so that's not the mood that I wanted to invoke by asking you this. I just
Yeah.
I would love to see you find a Quaker meeting that
Me
suited you,
too.
or bring that practice more and more into these calls and other calls you participate in, because there's something very beautiful and rich there. So just want to
Oh,
thank you
thank you.
for invoking it. Number one.
Thanks.
Number two, whoever it was who spoke about the person who observed their own psychosis and kind of, work themselves out of that. I'd love the reference for that book. It reminds me of a book a few years ago by a person, I believe was a neuroscientist, who had a stroke and observed the process of her stroke.
It's My Stroke of Genius.
My Stroke of Genius, which is fascinating
Jill Bolte
approach. I'd love-
Taylor, I think.
And it's Jill Bolte Taylor, exactly.
Yes, thank you, Ken. Exactly so. But so this this one about the psychopathy resonated for that. I'd love to see that
My
as well.
Stroke of Insight is actually what it's called, not My Stroke of Genius. Sorry about that.
Okay. And then in terms of thematically, I think if we drop this conversation into our AIs like somebody's probably already done, the phrase that my mind keeps hearing in this conversation over and over again, standing out more than any other, in addition to trust, is business model. It's hearing it again and again. There's not a business model. 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 We're in the world that is run by business models. The business models for media and information technology and all the stuff that we're talking about was nailed, I think, beautifully by Jerry Mander in 4 Arguments for the Elimination of Television in 1985 or something like that. And one of the things that Jerry, I thought, nailed exactly is that the nature of this business is that it's selling attention. The product in media is not the information. The product is us and our eyeballs and our attention. And that's been elaborated to a great degree by the social media world, which is layered on top of, or layered through attention, the addiction model. And boatloads of scientists working on developing addictive processes that make us hunt and seek and stick to these things. And that's, the business model is tied up with that, with attention and addiction. So I think the question of what could be another business model, or maybe there's a better phrase than that, because that already surrenders to the game. But what is a model that can enable the kind of information ecosystems that we're talking about? And I would suggest that not-for-profit is not sufficient, because that depends on philanthropy, which depends on wealth accumulation, which depends on the same system that we're talking about. So I don't know where this goes, but for me, that's the powerful, resonant question thread through this conversation. I'm complete.
Thank you very much, Gil. Sorry, I forgot I was muted because I was busy finding the current link to the Jill Bolte Taylor talk. Jesse.
Thanks, Jerry. Sorry, I'm not able to get on the camera. And again, thank you for bringing the Quaker experience here and your own flavor, because I too appreciate it. And it seems like to me that distrust and misunderstanding or an argument, it often comes from 2 certain people, and which then takes on a new form with the triangulation of a 3rd person, and then observers coming into the fold. It takes on a new form, and I really love the talking about the surrendering to the game, because what you did, Jerry, earlier, when there was a lot of energy around a specific topic, you brought in a story, and it inspires. I really do see how stories inspire the mind to enter into uncertainty. and ambiguity and the preference for inquiry instead of order. And that's what I love about these calls. You know, we bring in, we evoke stories and even the poems that are brought to this call. It really does evoke this uncertainty principle. And I just want to share that the more of that, please. Thank you.
Super. Yeah. Thank you, Jesse. Judy.
Well, I'm going to come back to a topic before that I've mentioned before, but what's very concerning is the reliance on oral only communication of the mass majority of the public because they're not really literate and are unable to discern and seek sources of information other than through verbal contact. And I don't know how to address that. It's just so huge. But to me, we're not helping people to learn to be discerning in some process, and finding the right way to enable that or to facilitate it, to me, is really important if we want to influence opinions, because the 80% of the people are not in that discernment mode at all.
And is there a difference to you, Judy, between literacy and critical thinking? Are those neighboring concepts?
They don't have to be aligned, but frequently, if you want more information, the literacy becomes a factor, because you can only go out to a verbal group or to listen to things. It's either broadcast to you and it's already canned, or you have to find a group to have discussion that will facilitate that discussion. So I see literacy as a significant failure point for all of this.
Thank you. And then there's a whole other call we can have about critical thinking. I mean, there's a bunch of neighboring issues we've been kind of sliding past that would be really nice subjects for OGM calls, and hopefully things that get fixed in the world. But just to respond to what you're saying, one of my beliefs is that people are actually way smarter than we think they are, but our conditions, our settings, our contexts often make us act and be pretty stupid. And also that people will often live up to how you treat them. They will, if you assume that they're smart, often they will work hard to like do the smarter thing or the better thing or whatever else. People will rise to what you see in them in different ways. And it's one of the reasons why I think that assuming good intent is good, because it tends to bring about good intent. And assuming bad intent means you treat everybody with suspicion, which wins you back suspicion and bad behavior. I think that those are sort of opposing loops in sort of human social behavioral settings. And how go ahead.
I was just going to say, my favorite phrase in conversation with people is "help me understand."
Right.
Because
I think I've got that in my brain under you.
because I think if it's much more effective than being polarizing or saying, well, that disagrees with whatever, or here's this source. I think people are intuitive about these things, and to some extent they believe what they want to believe or what fits with their value framework. But if you ask a question that's open and genuine, seeking understanding of their point of view, that leads you to a conversation that's deeper and more focused.
Some degree of mutual respect and curiosity. Yeah. Thank you. Rick.
Yeah, just to build on what you were just saying there, I'll just share another story about being involved with this indivisible group. So I had to write things. I write at the highest level to start off with, because it's just my way my brain works. And then I bring it down to different levels. And I've coined this phrase called HEN, which means humanist guided. That's the H. AI enabled, emancipatory neo-learning. And I'm using what everyone knows, the KISS principle: keep it simple, stupid. The other one is keep sophistication this side of simplicity, which means you can use AI to change things, as Klaus has spoken. You can change it to different orientations, whatever. That's the beauty of it. Now, what's happening in this group is that I've actually cascaded them to start using AI, and this is a lot of baby boomers, and they're using it. And the lead guy came, and I wrote something in a post, and he to him, and he says, "Well, I put it in AI and asked it to reduce it down to a sixth grade reading level, and then sent it back to me." And I said, "Yeah, it's pretty good." And then I said what was missing or whatever. But the idea of how we can use AI as an emancipatory learning process. And one of the triggers that, some people say, oh, you're just using big words or you're just using jargon. And, that's a conditioned reflex from a system that's indoctrinated people not to be curious about new things.
Mhm.
What if instead of seeing jargon as an object of rejection, instant rejection, that people were actually encouraged to be curious about it? Maybe this is something I can learn from this new word, rather than just simply, oh, it's jargon. Put it in the trash can of ignorance, so to speak. And to me, that's how do we and the story that I think it was Gil was mentioning what's happening in Finland. I mean, that is an element of emancipatory learning, from what I heard. I mean, I've read the book by Adam Grant on hidden talents, and certainly their educational system it was the best in the world, but now a lot of Asian countries have replicated, and they've slipped down the chain of education. So I really think it comes back to how do we create a culture of emancipation opposed to a culture of indoctrination, which is what the attention economy is all about.
Thanks, Rick.
Dispute anything I just said, by the way.
And I'm going to address you right now. Rick, do you think I'm a curious person?
Yes.
I would ask you, tell me more about why you think you're a curious person.
No. I'm asking you an opinion. I'm not asking you to do
No, I'm not. Yeah, no,
Eliza back to me. I'm like, do you think I'm
not,
curious?
I invited you to respond to your own question. I'm evading it deliberately.
Oh, perfect. Good. And and just generally, do you think I'm relatively open-minded? I don't think I'm completely open-minded because we're all we cling to our beliefs. We're pretty stuck on them. And Rick, I say this full of love for you, and I will say this: you're unusual in this for me and all the people I know, in that when you speak in meetings we have on Zoom and we've never met in person, I love what you say and I'm completely on board. I cannot read things you write because you use jargon and really long words and emancipatory neo something. I just tried to write down by the time I got back to remembering what to write down, I had forgotten the phrase. I find your writing not readable, and I've told you this before, and it's just my opinion. And
I
I
accept that.
therefore don't go in and read your things. But when you hear this from other people, they're probably people who feel like I do when they encounter your writing.
Oh, you're absolutely spot on, and I accept that feedback altogether. But I'll go yes and okay, that's where you are, and then I can adjust it to whatever. That's the KISS principle. So if you have difficulties with
But you're
5
not
words,
adjusting. You're not adjusting.
no,
Your writing
well, you're not
today
giving
is the
me
same as your
you
writing a couple
no
years ago.
no. You haven't read my stuff recently, then. I even go into AI and ask it to do notebook
Well, that's
LMs
good.
at sixth grade leaving, 12th grade leaving, graduate level. There's a whole series of ways in which you can create outputs for different reading levels. And then I will take a complex question, say, right at sixth grade level, 12th grade level. So that's what I'm doing.
Cool. I
So
will go.
saying
So
so.
can you send me a
I,
couple of new links that do that? Because I want
yeah,
access to your writing that I don't have
okay,
right
that's
now.
fine. Okay, that's fine. I will send it to you. I'm working on one at the moment that's directed towards indivisible. I haven't finished it yet, and it deals with these issues.
Love that. Thank you. And thanks for being so gracious about that. Mr. Nelson.
This isn't meant to pile on, but let me just say exactly what Jerry said and turn it up to 11. I have people who have heard me talk over the last 35 years, and some of them will meet me for the first time in 20 years, and they'll say, "Yeah, I heard a talk you gave 22 years ago." And I'll say, what was it about? And they'll say, I'm not sure, but you started off by saying, you gotta have a good bumper sticker in Washington. And by that, I mean 4 syllables to define a buzzword.
Mike's internet connection is unreliable, which is what we are experiencing right now. I think if we're patient, he'll be back with us in just a second.
If it's really well crafted buzzword, it's 7 words for.
Mike, your
Okay,
internet your net
I will.
connection is crapping out on you right now.
I'm turning off the video. Does that
Good.
make things better?
It should keep going, and it should help.
I'm sorry about that. My wife's also using our limited bandwidth. But anyway, buzzword, 4 or 5 syllables, bumper sticker, 7 or 8 words that is memorable. It's something that sticks in the brain. It's visual, it's emotional. And this goes back to our truth problem. I mean, the reason Trump is winning the information battle is because he's really good at emotional, visual bumper stickers. He doesn't care about statistics. He makes them up and completely undermines things. And that's the thing I really wanted. The other thing I wanted to pick on you about, Rick, was you said we have a choice, emancipation or indoctrination. What Trump is doing is not indoctrination. He's reaching out to all sorts of groups. They've been indoctrinated in all sorts of different ways. What he's done, and this is the brilliant part, it's what Putin really taught the world how to do starting 35 years ago. He didn't do the Stalin disinformation trick, which was to just flood everybody with one consistent message. You know, the Soviet Union is all powerful. We are here to, liberate the peasants. And, it wasn't one story. For 35 years, Putin and his digital Rasputin, he has this guy who's worked with him his entire career, who is an expert at throwing 5 or 6 different messages, contradictory messages, out through mass media. This is what Steve Bannon has done with the War Room. He brings in all these wacko people who tell totally different stories, some of them quite anti-Trump, a lot of them fantasies about the dark state. After 30 minutes of this, people have no idea what's going on in the world and they have no confidence in their ability to figure it out. And that is the third option. So it's emancipation, indoctrination, or discombobulation. And that's where we are now. And what both Trump and Putin have done is confuse the hell out of people, including my very wise rocket scientist father, who after 10 years of Fox News just started, I don't know what's going on. So anyway, long talk, but for some reason, Trump has convinced people emotionally that he's on their side. So you don't know what's going on. I'll take care of it.
Can I respond?
Please.
Yes, please.
Yeah. The framing I gave was not meant to be a complete synopsis of the complexity of the systemic psychopathy, and I don't dispute anything you just said. And certainly he hasn't done the indoctrination. This is the indoctrination process that's been going on for 50 years since Ronald Reagan enabled the turnover of the fairness doctrine. And it sort of allowed the alt-right neo-terrorism enterprise to flourish. So he's just a poster boy who is an emotional savant to people's brains, and he's able to resonate with their angst and frame things in such a way that he commands their blind, unconditional loyalty. He is a brilliant marketing maverick, unequivocally. Now, going back to the issue of the simplification thing, that has merit, but to me, it's a sort of reductionist way of looking at complexity. And while it has a certain degree of surface validity from my point of view, it doesn't deal with complexity. And so you have to give Trump his full credit for exploiting something that he didn't invent, which was MAGA, using it for his own purposes, manipulating people around it in such a masterful way that he has people believing everything he says, and they will not question him. I mean, I go and listen to these stories that these individual people have when talking to Trump supporters. I mean, it's water off a duck's back. I mean, it just doesn't, you know. So when I was framing that was a reductionist frame to thinking about we have to shift towards helping people to start learning how to discern, to verify, and seek truth, collaborative together without the divisiveness, polarization, etc. And one of the big problems we have is that people's political identities, and this happens so often, is attached to their point of view. You challenge their point of view or trigger their point of view, and it creates this binary emotional backlash. And we don't have a language to educate people. That's what I'm interested in. What I just, those 5 words, it was 5 words. It was a mouthful, I know. And you have to read it, not read it out aloud to assimilate the meaning of it. And how can we create beloved learning communities where people, the content, it's focusing on process, not on content. We've got to get the process right. Otherwise, we won't get the content right. And so much of marketing has to do with content delivery. We live in a content creators world, and we're not focusing on process enough.
Thank you, Rick. Gil, Jose, Stacy, and then I'd like to share my notes by screen sharing that I've been doing during this call, just because there's a lot of really good stuff here and it's worth seeing for a second. So Gil, please. Gil, your breakfast lasts a long time.
That's because I stop periodically.
Ah,
And I use my hands to write things.
cool.
And go off camera. Golly, a couple things here. Mike, you said something about discombobulation. I felt from the beginning that the Reagan, the Trump, Bannon, et cetera, strategy has been to reduce the opposition to sputtering apoplexy. Like, for years, the main response was, do you believe what he said? How could he say that? This is, just like reactive and not active. So there's that. Someone, Rick, I think said, or someone said this began with, Klaus, I guess you said began with Reagan. It actually began 10 years earlier. Reagan was a follow-up to what began in the early 70s with the Powell Memorandum and the work of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce to set in motion this, 50-plus year strategy that has been consistently followed across this time, in contrast to what the Dems have done. But that's not what I wanted to speak about. What was I want to speak about? Oh, yeah. So there was a post in OGM recently, I don't know if it was from me or from somebody else, on Mo Gaudat's conversation about the future of AI, which is very much worth watching if you haven't seen it. It's long, but it's worth going into the whole thing. Ken's got a digest of it, but it doesn't capture the whole mood. This is a conversation on a podcast called Diary of a CEO. DOAC is the code word for it. It turns out it's like one of the 10 most popularly watched podcasts in the world, run by a guy named Stephen Bartlett, who is trying to build $1 billion media empire. He's in the hundreds of millions at this point. And he's got another parallel stream called Behind the Diary. And in the episode I watched last night, he was showing how his organization monitors their YouTube analytics of everything they publish down to the minute. YouTube apparently provides this. I didn't know this, showing the attention and drop-off rates during the course of a very long podcast, and they then tune their broadcast to constantly learning from how is the audience reacting, how do they tailor their material so that they can get more and tighter attention and addiction. And Bartlett, who is the CEO of this 100 and some odd person operation, says he spends 2.5 hours a day monitoring Google Analytics.
Great Scott.
Great Scott. Yes, indeed. So if he's doing that, how much you want to bet that Bannon and crew are doing that too? And I'll commend to people's attention, Bannon did an interview with Ross Douthat of the Times, I think somewhere in the last 6 months. where he is very forthrightly laying out the strategy that he's been cultivating for many years, long before Trump, and talks about the moment in 2015 or 2016, whenever it was, where he encountered Trump, or they encountered Trump in some sort of situation and said, "That's the guy we've been looking for. Casting, hire him." But the strategy was already there long before Donald showed up. Jose, to you.
Over to you.
Thank you. I've been struggling with this conversation because I think we kind of feel like we all have to have an opinion about everything that's happening in the world. We have to know it all, and we have to have an opinion on it, and we have to know what's right and what's wrong. And I wonder if that's really necessary. From a human nature perspective, we knew about our village, we knew about the people around us, and everything else was sort of like we just didn't know, and we couldn't care for the most part because we had no means of knowing. And I wonder if the way we've evolved is to be able to make sense of what we can touch, and that making sense of what we can't touch is really, really difficult. And so we end up looking for stories that validate what we're feeling. And we forget that what's judging that is the feeling part. And what we just said about Trump, I don't think people who follow Trump are following Trump because he makes sense, or because he's got a good story, or because he his narrative is well done, accurate, real, connected. I think people follow Trump because he makes them feel like they're not wrong about what they're feeling about the world. That they feel all kinds of stuff is wrong, and this guy keeps saying all kinds of stuff is wrong. And right, wrong, or indifferent in how he says it, and the stats and the numbers and the accuracy, who cares? Because it's so distant from me. It doesn't really matter if his numbers are right or his story is right. What I feel is consistent with the way he makes me think I should feel. And when we argue it from logic and stories that are accurate and the numbers are accurate and all of that stuff, I think we're missing the point. And a lot of what I see coming through on OGM and other lists is this idea that if we could just get to the accuracy of it, then other people would see it our way. And I don't think that that's going to happen. In fact, I think we're just burying ourselves in a deeper hole. So I don't know if that makes sense to any of you guys, but it seems like this argument isn't going to get us very far. By this argument, I mean that we need to have more logic and more accuracy and more truth. So thank you. And thank you for this topic, Jerry.
Thanks, Jose. Can you just expand a little bit more on what you mean? Because this community is a sense-making community, kind of, sort of. Like that's what we do. We're busy piecing together collectively the things we see about different phenomena in the world, and we're doing a lot. We're guilty of a lot of what you just said that we're doing, but I'm not clear what you're saying we ought to be doing instead, or the alternative is, or where you're pointing.
I'm pointing towards stepping back from, like, how much do we need to know about things that don't necessarily involve us directly, right?
So should we not be sticking our noses into the Trumpocalypse, for example?
That's a case of where I think maybe it's not about avoiding it and trying to, follow what's going on and so forth. But I think we need to look at it for what it is rather than to try to correct, like posting a post here, there, anywhere on social media or anything else. He misspoke. He told the wrong fact. The number is actually 500. It's not 250. Whatever the reality of the situation is, the people who are ready are invigorated by his message, his emotional message, don't know and don't care about the number. And that us harping on the number, and I say us, assuming most of us are on that side of the spectrum, we're doing ourselves a disservice, and them a disservice by talking about the number rather than talking about the feeling. The feeling that they feel is accurate. The feeling he speaks to is accurate. Figuring out how to change things so that they don't feel that way is what we should be talking about, not the number, not the story he's laying out, because he's going to keep laying out the story that resonates with what they're feeling. That's accurate. That's what he's going to do. And if he has to change facts to do that, he will. We all do that. Every single one of us change facts slightly in order to make our story more believable, more rigid, more in line with what the message we want to deliver.
I think I'm.
Does that help to answer your question? I'm sorry.
It does, and I want to reply to you. I think I'm mostly on board with what you're saying, and I just made myself some notes in the chat so I remember what I want to say. For me, and this is, I think what we're doing is we're sharing our interpretations of what's going on, and I think that when we're all spun up that a number was inaccurate or oh my God, that's such a lie, we are playing into the game that Trump and MAGA and the far right and Steve Bannon are all perpetrating and doing completely intentionally. Like when they say, look, the moon is in the sky, and Elizabeth Taylor's like, no, that's the sun. It's like, no, it's the moon. This is in fact a debate over power. And for me, Trump's use of modern media is an exercise in power. And Trump has more elbow room than any politician in my lifetime. He has created for himself the ability to reverse himself, lie like a rug, do whatever, and still be in charge the next day and make a comeback. His inaugural speech the second time is like, hey, most of you thought this was a real long shot, but here I am. Nobody thought I would come back and do this, but this is like one of the great comebacks of American political history, and it kind of is. Right. So a lot of people, and we each have different theories about why people follow him and what's going on. And I'm very interested in all the different facets or readings of what's going on because I think that really matters because it's going to affect our future like crazy. So when you start by saying we're kind of poking our nose into things that don't have direct impact on us, I'm like, which one doesn't? Like the educational system, regenerative agriculture, to me, it's all a big hairball, a big nexus of things that are deeply intertwined that respond a lot to the dominant narratives or stories that people foist on us that we then buy or don't buy, that win or lose elections, that then change everything on the ground because the government is now being completely ripped into a different shape in a way that most of us didn't expect, but were afraid might happen. And it's actually like underway right this second. So it feels to me like all that stuff that is actually pretty distant, policy level stuff, et cetera, feels like it's going to affect me and us and so forth a lot. So I don't know, that's kind of, and I think we're doing ourselves a disservice when we take the bait, but we're not doing ourselves a disservice when we talk about this dynamic. I think understanding this dynamic and figuring out countermeasures is desperately important.
Yeah. And I'd love to dig deep a little, but we're out of time. So
step away.
Shoot. Damn, there's the 50-minute hour. We're over. Like therapy is done for the day. Shit. Stacy, therapy is not so done that you can't have your say. I'm hoping Mr. Homer has a poem for us, and I will postpone. I'll send a link to my, while you're talking, I'll send a link to my Nexus for my notes, and I'll show them maybe next week if anybody's interested. But go ahead, please.
Oh, thank you, Jose. I'm all riled up now, though. Let me calm down a minute. But my comments pertain to what was said about identity and process and what Jose just said. So a revelation that I recently had about my upbringing is that I realized that I learned by watching my mother educate my father.
That's
So
cool.
it actually is kind of cool. So like when I was so both of my parents are Republican. And when I was in college, I remember a professor saying to me, because clearly I'm not conservative. And he said, how did you get to be the way you are? And I said, they taught me good values, because they did. They didn't tell me how to think, but because I was observing their dialogue and I was allowed to interject and question, and I was curious, that's how I learned. So I try to take that approach onto social media when I can. So I had an experience the other day. I put up what I thought was a benign post, and I said, can we at least admit that America has an anger management problem? I thought that would be an easy kind of thing to not fight about. Anyway, long story short, I have a cousin. She's not that bright. She's never been political until right before the last election. And I spoke to her privately, and she was like, I don't know any of these things, but I can't, whatever. Well, all of a sudden I woke up yesterday to like a really personal attack. You never worked a day in your life, like all this. And I was shocked. I'm shocked now, reliving it in my mind. But I wanted to speak to that identity piece. And also, Jose, the one piece you left out is, in addition to why they like Trump, it's also an outlet for them to let their anger out. I can't emphasize that part enough. And yes, there is anger on both sides, and it does need to be recognized everywhere, which is why I spoke about anger management. I wasn't putting it to one party or the other. What else did I want to say? The process. Okay. So I was just on a call before this, and the person was talking about the Constitution, made a mistake twice. My normal thing is, if it doesn't interfere with the intent of something, like when it comes to words, I think we should be quiet, because you know what a person meant. But in this case, I brought it up mostly because we were talking about process and a similar conversation. And I wanted to express how hard it is for a person to speak to authority and to let them know, oh, you made a mistake, or this is not accurate. I mean, I had that experience on Facebook where somebody I really respect will put something up, and it takes everything I have to just say, are you sure this is true? Are you sure this is real? And I'm happy to do it because I think it needs to be done. But when it comes to process, there's a voice inside my head that keeps saying it takes a village, because unfortunately, most of us, I mean, all of us, but some of us check ourselves with it. We don't treat people we like the same as we treat people we don't like. That part, I think, is a default. I disagree with things like we all do it, because some of us have taken precautions and have worked to make sure they don't automatically do that. But for the most part, something happens in us. And so I guess I'm speaking to reliability, and depending on where it's coming from, and moving to the business model part of it. And I'll give one example of something from my side that goes to this need to create content that's going to get eyeballs. This whole freedom medal for big balls. It's a non-story. It's an absolute non-story, because at the root of its beginnings is one conservative guy, Benny Johnson, asking, which is really planting a story. I mean, and that's how they play us. They ask a question to plant a story for something that was never intended, so that now everybody can go and share all these stories to distract from what we should be paying attention to. So, and the other thing is, in terms of the numbers and, you know, correcting facts, I think those mistaken facts are put in on purpose. Again, using the Benny, the big ball story and who he was beat up by. I hear 14 years old. I hear 15 years old. I'm like, how is it we're getting two different ages? Like, is it deliberate? I mean, it's something so small like that, but I've been noticing a lot of really small errors that people normally wouldn't pick up on. And I can't help but think, do they purposely put these errors in? Because once you focus on that small error, you've lost the bigger point. So I think I covered everything I wanted to talk about. The most important thing is, though, how do we make it easier to question with, as Judith is always saying, that curiosity, but genuine curiosity, not, you know, not condescending curiosity, because there's a big difference between the two. Over.
That was stellar, Stacy. Thank you. Really appreciate it. And I believe that was the last substantive word for this call, although poems are of a substance slightly different. Mr. Homer.
So I apologize in advance. This poem has absolutely nothing to do with anything we've talked about on this call today.
Excellent.
But I wanted to share, if you were alive, this is not Jack Benny. This is my father.
Oh.
He would be 110 today. So I have a poem about fathers. I just found it this week, and it moved me to tears when I read it, and might do so again as I read it. It's called March 8th by David Lehman. Every so often, my father comes over for a visit. He hangs his overcoat and hat on my hat rack. I brief him on recent developments and serve us coffee. He's surprised that I like to cook. Once, when he made an omelet, he flipped it in the air, much to my delight, and it landed on the floor. Yes, that was the summer of 1952. He remembered the high breakers and how fearless I was running into the ocean anyway. The important thing is to see how you're doing so well, he said, and took his coat and hat and left before I remembered that he was dead.
Oof. Oof.
So in memories of fathers everywhere.
Thank you so much. That was beautiful. Wow. Hey, everybody. Thank you for an awesome call. Really appreciate it. More of this, okay? Cool. See you around. Let's be
Ciao.
careful out there. Bye for now.
Bye, everybody.